There are 2.4 doctors for every 1,000 people. As the main character runs through tall grass, he remembers that this number is the fifth lowest among all member countries of the OECD, and that this specific data belongs to Japan. The OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, currently has 38 member countries. Its main goal is to help the global economy grow by improving financial conditions, employment, and general living standards. Even so, he thinks this number might actually be considered lucky. In Tanzania, a country located in East Africa, there are only 0.06 doctors for every 1,000 people. He then imagines a land where the situation is even worse, a place so harsh that it would make Tanzania look blessed by comparison. Suddenly, a powerful blast of air blows toward him from a massive dragon. He stops moving entirely and starts to wonder what it truly means to be a doctor in a place like that. Later that evening, he arrives at a bar where two of his friends are already waiting for him. He tells them he is sorry for being late and explains that he experienced a delay. One of his friends suggests that his outpatient work must have taken a long time, while the other friend welcomes him and notes that he must be completely exhausted. The main character reflects on how the three of them have not shared a drink together since their days as medical residents. His friends point out that this is because he is always too busy, and they tell him he needs to make sure to take some time off. He answers that he is doing exactly that at this very moment. The room becomes quiet for a short time until one friend remarks that simply leaving work on time does not really count as a real break, especially since he had to stay late on this exact day. The conversation changes when they bring up some big news. The news is that one of the friends is going to become a father. This announcement causes loud surprise, excitement, and happy congratulations. Even though there are only 3 people there, the mood becomes very celebratory, and they decide to turn the night into a large party. However, they reveal that this is not the only piece of news. The attention turns back to the main character, and they suggest that this meeting should also serve as a goodbye party for him. The cheerful mood fades away as this fact sinks in. One friend offers an apology, but the main character feels confused by it and explains that his move is just a regular transfer. This response brings even more shock when it becomes clear that he is being sent to the Sima clinic. This clinic sits on a remote island inside a village that does not have any living resident doctor. He is scheduled to leave the very next day. He explains to them that there are people on that island who need medical help, and someone has to go. The other 2 friends fall silent for a moment. Finally, one of them says that he is a truly strange person and asks what will happen to his position at his current hospital and his career progress. The main character thinks quietly about the meaning of the word career. Suddenly, his phone rings. He realizes it is a call from the hospital, so he excuses himself and steps away to answer it. After listening to the explanation from staff, Amami quickly judges the situation. He instructs the medical team to get 4 units of map ready immediately. He informs them that he will travel there right away and orders them to make every preparation to stop the bleeding. In his mind, he remembers that 1 unit of map contains 140 milliliters of liquid, which is made by adding 46 milliliters of a red blood cell preservation fluid to red blood cells taken from 200 milliliters of donated blood. As he picks up his bag, he explains to his friends that a patient he has been treating for cirrhosis has vomited blood, most likely because of ruptured varicose veins. He then thinks over the medical details of the condition as he prepares to leave. An esophageal variceal rupture happens when increased blood pressure in the veins of the inner layers of the esophagus or stomach causes them to swell up like balloons and burst, which leads to a massive amount of bloody vomiting. Amami comforted his friends by promising that he would return to the bar after he stopped the bleeding, pointing out that the patient was still under his personal care. Before he walked out the door, he congratulated his friend once more on the news of becoming a father. After Amami left, one of the men in the bar wondered out loud if the doctor had become trapped in messy hospital politics. The other friend clarified that this was not the case at all, explaining that he himself was originally the one who was scheduled to be transferred. But when Amami found out about the situation, he chose to step in and take his place. The first man noted that this kind of behavior was exactly like Amami, and then he sighed at the thought that Amami had come all the way to a bar only to leave without having a single drink. They noted that Amami did not drink alcohol anymore, even though he used to enjoy it very much. The reason for this change was his deep fear that he might feel terrible regret if something bad happened to one of his patients while he was drinking. One of the friends scoffed at this selfless choice, observing that Amami was always acting for the sake of other people, almost like a hero in a story. Later on, Amami walked into the operating room, where another physician greeted him. He immediately moved forward to start stopping the bleeding and told the medical team to get ready for an EVL procedure. In his thoughts, he reviewed the details of the operation. An EVL, which stands for endoscopic variceal ligation, is an emergency treatment method used for swollen veins, especially when there is active bleeding. Doctors can also use this procedure through an endoscope as a preventive measure to stop bleeding before it even starts. As the night turned into morning, Amami sat down with the patient's family to go over the results of a genetic test. The findings revealed a change in a specific gene called PHX, which led to a diagnosis of hypophosphatemic rickets. He thought carefully about the nature of this illness. Primary hypophosphatemic rickets happens because the kidneys cannot properly absorb phosphorus back into the body through the renal tubules, which causes too much phosphorus to leave the body through urine. This problem leads to very low phosphorus levels in the blood, which ultimately causes rickets in children. When adults have this exact same condition, it is known as osteomalacia. The disease can be passed down through families, or it can happen without being inherited, and the types that are passed down are grouped even further based on how they are inherited and what kind of physical symptoms they cause. Amami explained to the family that the condition was not serious, and that the medicine they take by mouth seemed to be working very well, advising them not to worry. This explanation caused the mother to visibly relax with a sense of relief. Nearby, a nurse with bangs remarked with surprise that Dr. Amami had stayed at the hospital all night once again. Another nurse, who was watching the mother express her gratitude, confirmed that he had stayed behind even after finishing the emergency surgery to stop the bleeding. They pointed out that this was his final day at the university hospital, yet he had still chosen to stay through the night. The explanation for this choice was that Amami wanted to remain fully responsible for his patients until his very last moment on the job. They also recognized that if it were not for him, the true cause behind the little girl's repeated bone fractures might never have been discovered. The little girl cheerfully thanked him, which caused her mother to quickly remind her to speak to him properly by calling him a doctor. The child grinned at this, and Amami smiled back at her in response. The nurse with bangs mentioned that she had truly wanted him to stay at the university hospital, noting what a wonderful person he was. The nurse with a ponytail agreed with her, but she added that a person who is genuinely good cannot stay at a big university hospital forever. Amami then informed the little girl and her mother that it was his last day at the hospital. He asked them to make absolutely sure they did not forget to give the child her medication, and he told them both to take good care of themselves. The mother bowed very deeply to show her respect, and the little girl waved goodbye in a very cheerful way. Watching this scene happen, the nurse with bangs commented that being sent away to a remote village without a resident doctor was basically a one-way ticket that offered no real future for a medical career. The nurse with the ponytail called out to her co-worker to ask for help with the task, which caused the nurse with bangs to hurry over while apologizing for being distracted. Amami then caught the attention of the nurses and announced that he would be saying goodbye for now, thanking them both for everything they had done. Instead of just accepting his goodbye, the nurse with bangs insisted that they were the ones who should be thanking him for his hard work. Amami smiles and shares his hope of returning to them one day, wishing them a happy life until that time comes. Later, as the boat cuts sharply through the ocean waves, the captain loudly warns Amami not to do that in that specific spot. Amami leans heavily over the edge and vomits directly into the sea. The captain is completely shocked that a medical doctor could get seasick so quickly and asks if he took any medicine for the trip. Amami weakly thinks to himself that he likely threw up the medication already and that it had not done any good anyway. But his quiet voice is completely drowned out as the captain yells that he cannot understand such low muttering. The captain grumbles about doctors being physically weak, though he admits that the ocean is incredibly rough that day, so the sickness is not a complete surprise. They finally reach the island in the middle of fierce winds and pouring rain. Amami quietly tells himself that he has at last arrived at his destination. A local man urgently tells him to get inside out of the weather. As Amami dries himself off, he asks if the place they are standing in is a storage room. The village mayor clarifies that the room was actually used for surgeries in the past and apologizes for the mess, noting that almost nobody enters the room these days. The mayor adds that they still need to fix up the sleeping area located in the back. Amami's eyes widen as he realizes the mayor's regional accent is so incredibly heavy that he can barely understand a single word. He explains to the men that he knows his arrival is sudden, but he has heard the village has been without a doctor for a long time, so he asks that anyone needing medical care speak up immediately. The mayor and the other men simply look at each other. The mayor offers a reassuring reply, but Amami understands almost none of what the man says. Feeling highly embarrassed, Amami apologizes and explains that because he has only just arrived, he cannot catch their unique way of speaking yet. He feels a sense of guilt knowing they went through the trouble of welcoming him, and he decides that he must understand their speech by the time he officially starts working at the clinic. The mayor and the other locals stare at him for a brief moment. Then, the mayor tightly grabs his hand and expresses the deep gratitude of the entire island for his arrival. The captain tells Amami not to stress about the language barrier, saying the accent is thick enough to trouble absolutely anyone, and warmly welcomes him to the village. The mayor further explains that there are many villages all over the country that completely lack doctors, making Amami's arrival a true blessing. He mentions that the islanders wanted to throw a massive welcome party for him, but the terrible weather made it impossible. Deeply moved by this, Amami thinks about how there are as many as 600 villages in Japan without any doctors, and how even formal requests to the government often fail to fill those empty positions. He states his strong intention to learn the local dialect as quickly as possible. The captain laughs out loud and advises him not to push himself too hard. As they get ready to leave, the mayor tells Amami to get some rest and promises that they will return the following day if the storm calms down. Amami thanks everyone and requests that if anyone feels unwell, they should come to see him immediately. Amami reflects on how completely exhausted he feels. He drops heavily onto his bed and reminds himself that his absolute first task is to learn the local language. His eyes move from a bottle of water over to the refrigerator, and he decides to put the water inside to cool for a while. Just as he pulls open the refrigerator door, a deafening bolt of lightning strikes his house directly. The impact is incredibly powerful, and he is severely electrocuted by the surge of energy. In another place entirely, a carriage travels along a road, followed by a long line of enslaved people bound together by heavy chains. Massive monsters stomp heavily on the ground as they pull the heavy vehicle forward. One of the captives gasps for air as the metal chain pulls ruthlessly against her body. She is a beast girl who is completely worn out from being forced to walk for such a long time, and she eventually collapses directly onto the ground. A guard notices her fall and shouts for the line to stop. The driver reacts with deep irritation, demanding to know what is going on. The guard looks down at the fallen prisoner, recognizes who she is, and orders her to get back on her feet and keep walking. Inside the carriage, a wealthy merchant speaks directly to his subordinate, a man named Crane. Crane turns toward his master, waiting to receive his instructions. The merchant shows absolutely no interest in the specific details of the situation and coldly orders that the slave be killed immediately, stating that broken or defective goods are never sold and should not be kept around. Crane hesitates upon hearing this command, thinking to himself that this particular slave had been incredibly difficult to capture in the first place and was highly valuable merchandise. The merchant gives a cold look that stops Crane from arguing any further, and Crane agrees to follow the command. He thinks to himself that spilling blood right next to the other slaves would cause too many problems, so he decides to handle the task quickly. The beast girl cries out loud as Crane roughly pulls her away from the group. He thinks that her terrible situation is just the result of bad luck and a lack of physical strength. Just as he lifts his sharp spear into the air, a massive presence suddenly shows up right behind him. A huge, towering monster comes out of nowhere and lets out a loud, terrifying roar. Deep panic fills Crane, causing him to run away as fast as he can while yelling warnings to everyone else. The beast girl shakes with absolute terror as the giant chimera stands over her. She screams out loud when the monster grabs her tightly and suddenly vanishes from the spot. Meanwhile, in a completely different forest far away, Amami is resting heavily against a large tree. He wakes up from being unconscious and scratches his head in deep confusion, then looks around his new surroundings and shouts out to see if anyone is close by. He hears a quiet, rustling noise in the plants and spots a round slime calmly drinking liquid from a puddle on the ground. His eyes grow very wide because he cannot believe what he is seeing, so he pinches his own skin to make sure that he can still feel pain. Looking at things from a medical point of view, his physical senses are working perfectly, which proves that this strange situation is not a dream, but real life. He examines the slime very carefully, completely amazed by how it looks, and wonders about its physical body makeup, and whether a creature like that should even be drinking a sports drink from his bottle. The creature looks identical to a slime character from video game. The slime moves and reaches out toward his bottle, so Amami gives it to the creature, thinking to himself that this strange place is definitely not the island of Saima. Before he can even finish that thought, the beast girl suddenly falls out of nowhere and crashes right down on top of him. He is very startled by the sudden crash and notices that she has very unusual ears, but he immediately turns his full attention to her breathing, which sounds dangerously unhealthy and wrong. The beast girl shouts something out loud that he cannot understand at all, which makes him cry out in surprise. He realizes yet again that he cannot comprehend the spoken language here, but his natural instincts as a medical doctor force him to inspect her physical health anyway. Right at that moment, the slime jumps up high and completely covers Amami's entire head. He fights against it and struggles until he shakes the slimy creature off in total confusion. When the slime finally lets go and comes off, he hears the beast girl urgently telling him that they need to run away immediately. He is completely shocked to find that he can suddenly understand her exact words. He tells her to wait a moment, and then he wonders what exactly they are supposed to be running away from. The clear answer shows up immediately as the terrifying chimera steps out into view close to them. Amami picks up the beast girl and stands up on his feet, looking straight into the eyes of the giant monster. Terrible fear takes over his body, so he turns around and tries to run away very quickly, but he loses his balance and falls down hard on the ground. The chimera stops for a moment. Amami quickly throws his own body over the beast girl to protect her, desperately trying to figure out a way to solve this dangerous problem. As the monster comes even closer to them, he quickly pulls and drags the girl into the thick bushes nearby. He makes a silent sign with his hands for her to stay hidden and completely quiet, and then he runs back out into the open to get the chimera's attention by waving his small medical pen light and shouting loudly at it. The beast girl watches in absolute horror as the giant chimera walks heavily toward Amami and gets ready to run fast and attack him. Just as Amami prepares himself to sprint away, the slime suddenly shows up again and shoots out a massive blast of water, creating a big fountain that surprises and scares the chimera. The monster stops moving, stares at the strange sight for a moment, and then turns around and walks away. The water slowly goes away as the slime calms down. Amami realizes that the little slime completely saved his life, not only by making the monster leave, but also by giving him the power to understand the beast girl's language. Once the terrible danger is completely gone, Amami checks on the beast girl to make sure she is okay and confirms that they are finally safe. He examines her skin carefully and recognizes the physical symptoms right away, knowing that the red rash on her body is the clear result of an allergic reaction. The beast girl continues to wheeze very violently. Amami observes her dangerous condition and immediately suspects that she is suffering from asthma combined with hives. Her state of consciousness is clearly impaired, and when he checks her wrist to find a pulse, he cannot feel any heartbeat at all. He remembers his medical training, which states that the pulse at the wrist becomes impossible to feel when the top number of a person's blood pressure drops below 80 millimeters of mercury. Furthermore, the pulse at the groin disappears when the pressure drops around 70 millimeters of mercury, and the pulse at the neck vanishes completely around 60 millimeters of mercury. In general medical practice, when a patient's normal blood pressure is completely unknown, a top blood pressure reading of 90 millimeters of mercury or lower means the body is in a dangerous state of shock. This leaves absolutely no doubt in his mind that she is experiencing a severe condition called anaphylaxis. Anaphylactic shock is a highly dangerous and potentially life-threatening overreaction to allergens, where the severe allergic symptoms suddenly affect multiple organs all throughout the body. When this reaction is accompanied by a very dangerous drop in blood pressure and a loss of clear consciousness, it is formally classified as anaphylactic shock. At this extreme level of severity, the condition can easily cause death unless a doctor treats it immediately. Common things that trigger this kind of reaction include certain foods, insect stings like those from bees, and specific medications. Amami notices a wound on her leg that is bleeding, but he can tell that the bleeding is not very severe. He decides that the cut can wait because the deadly allergic reaction must be treated first. What she needs more than anything is adrenaline, and she needs it fast. He finds the medicine and prepares the injection, reminding himself that an adrenaline self-injection kit is a temporary emergency measure meant to slow down the quick progress of anaphylaxis and stop shock until a doctor can provide proper medical care. He silently says he is sorry for the upcoming pain before injecting the adrenaline directly in her leg, which causes her to cry out loud. Right at that moment, a group of beast folk arrives at the scene. Their eldest member steps forward and immediately shouts out that Amami is a human being. Amami is startled by their sudden appearance and asks them who they are. The elder explains that they live in a village nearby and that the young girl lying on the ground is his own granddaughter, demanding to know exactly what Amami is doing to her body. Amami answers without any hesitation, stating clearly that he is giving her necessary medical treatment, though he notes that it will still take some time for her to recover. He urgently tells them that they need to carry her to a safe and clean location right away. The elder repeats the words medical treatment with complete disbelief in his voice, while Amami continues to plead with them for the girl's safety. Later on, inside the village of the beast folk, Amami places a small tool called a pulse oximeter onto the beast girl's hand. This specific device measures the oxygen level in the blood vessels and tracks the pulse rate directly through the skin without any needles. He looks closely at the screen and notes that her oxygen level is currently at 98%. Feeling a great sense of relief, he concludes that she will be perfectly fine without the need for a breathing tube in her throat. Still, he knows that her body must be given a special steroid liquid through a drip to help her recover completely. As the village elder watches Amami work so carefully, he thinks deeply about his granddaughter's heavily swollen skin and her painful, difficult breathing. To him and his people, these scary symptoms have always been seen as a dark curse from the forest god. He thinks to himself that if this human truly manages to cure her illness, it would change everything. Suddenly, One of the beast men calls out loudly to the chief. The chief then declares to everyone that this human must be a genuine magic user. When the others ask him why he believes this, the chief does not give an immediate answer. By that time, the beast girl's body has visibly relaxed, and Amami confirms that her breathing is now perfectly stable, judging that she is completely out of danger for the time being, which leaves the chief totally speechless. The very first thing the beast girl hears as she slowly regains her consciousness is the steady, quiet sound of the medical drip. When she finally opens her eyes, Amami notes that she seems much more awake and alert now, and he feels a huge wave of relief wash over him. She weakly mutters the word human in surprise. He gently tells her to wait and warns her that the medical tube is still attached to her arm, but she suddenly jumps up anyway despite his warning. Her legs give out almost immediately from weakness, and she collapses right back down. Amami moves toward her quickly and asks in a very gentle voice whether her legs are still hurting. He explains to her that he needs to examine her body properly to make sure she is completely healed, and he asks for her permission to check her thoroughly. The girl does not say a word and simply stares at his wide, friendly grin in complete silence. Suddenly, the little slime jumps up, shoots her high up into the air, and drops her right back down onto the examination table. Startled by the slime's sudden action, the beast girl screams out loud. Amami stands right beside her, watching the entire scene calmly before letting out a soft sigh. Finally, the beast girl gives in to the situation and agrees to let him help, asking him to go ahead with whatever he needs to do to treat her. In a church located somewhere far away, the deep sound of ringing bells echoes through the grand hall while sacred prayers are being recited. A priest raises his hand up high and casts healing magic over a merchant's badly injured hand. A bright, flashing light suddenly flares up, and right before the merchant's own eyes, the open wound closes up completely. The merchant stares at his healed hand in absolute awe, deeply moved by what he just witnessed, and offers his heartfelt thanks to the priest. Having just encountered such a terrifying monster earlier, the merchant had honestly feared for his life and never imagined he would walk away from the danger completely unharmed. The priest humbly waves off the high praise, explaining that the healing was not his own doing at all, but was instead the direct guidance of their proper God. He remarks that seeing such strong faith rewarded so clearly moves him very deeply. As the soft sound of metal coins jingles nearby, the priest lowers his voice to a quiet murmur and suggests that perhaps the merchant's traveling companions might have been saved as well, if only they had received proper treatment much sooner. He reflects sadly that their personal faith must simply not have been strong enough, calling the entire situation a truly great pity. Meanwhile, back in the beast folk village, Amami announces to the room that the medical treatment is completely finished. The beast girl remarks with great surprise that her injury does not hurt at all anymore. Amami explains to her that the anesthetic medicine is simply doing its job correctly, and he reassures her that the wound will heal up very quickly, especially since her young age will help her body recover fast. The sudden realization that she is completely safe fills his mind with an overwhelming sense of relief. The beast girl thanks him deeply for his help and asks him directly if he is a powerful magic user or mage. Amami scoffs lightly at the very idea of this. He reasons to himself that if he truly had the power to use magic, he would never have needed to cut her fingernails just to check her pulse rate, nor would have had to struggle so hard just to remove the heavy metal collar from her neck. He explains to her very clearly that he is not a mage at all, but rather just a regular doctor, a general physician. The girl lets out a sigh and points out that the numbing medicine sounds exactly like healing magic, which is something she firmly believes only human beings are allowed to use. Amami quickly corrects her mistaken belief, insisting that his medical work is not magic in the slightest, nor is it a skill restricted only to certain groups of people. He explains that medicine is actually a field of knowledge that absolutely anyone can learn and successfully use if they are willing to put in the necessary time and hard work. The beast girl hesitates for a moment, clearly unsure, and then asks him if someone like her, who is a beast folk slave, could truly learn the ways of medicine as well. Amami answers her without a single bit of hesitation, stating that it would not be a problem at all. He promises that if she genuinely wants to learn, he will happily help teach it to her, and they will work through the lessons together. He then introduces himself by his full name, Yudo Amami, telling her that she can simply call him Yudo, and he kindly asks her for her own name. She responds by telling him that her name is Corona. Amami smiles warmly at her, and says that he truly looks forward to working closely with her from now on. Right at that very moment, the village chief walks into the room. Amami informs the older man that his granddaughter is feeling much better now, which causes the chief to express a temporary sense of relief. However, his mood quickly changes as he coldly remarks that her recovery means that when the brutal slave traders inevitably return to the village, the locals can simply hand her right back over to them. Corona begins to tremble all over in deep fear upon hearing this, and Amami turns his head to stare straight at the chief in absolute disbelief. The chief continues speaking, strictly reminding Amami that stealing another person's slaves is completely forbidden by the law, and he demands to know exactly why the doctor brought her into their village in the first place. He explains that Corona is a slave who was intentionally offered as a forced payment to the traders in exchange for the village being left completely alone and unharmed. He adds that using healing magic is totally forbidden to absolutely everyone except the official church, and their poor village can simply no longer afford to pay the incredibly high price for it. The chief warns Amami that claiming he did not know the rules will not excuse his actions. Corona cries out loud, desperately insisting to the chief that Amami did not steal her at all, but the chief harshly silences her, ordering her to stay completely quiet since she is nothing more than a slave. She shakes in terrible fear, while Amami bravely speaks up for her, stating firmly that when a creature in desperate need is standing right in front of his eyes, he simply cannot turn his back and walk away. He insists that his duty as a doctor is all there is to the matter. The chief responds coldly that magic holds a value far greater than even life itself, and because of his reckless actions, Amami has now become a dangerous seed of disaster for their community. The chief declares that the only possible solution to protect the village is to completely eliminate the doctor. Amami shouts out loud in pure outrage at this completely twisted and unfair logic. But before anyone can say another word, a tremendously loud cracking sound suddenly splits the air as a giant, ferocious chimera smashes violently through the surrounding walls of the building. The village beast folk begin to scream in absolute terror, with some people crying out that the giant monster is actually the angry forest god, while others despairingly declare that their village is completely finished. A beastman quickly grabs the panicked chief and runs away to escape, shouting out that nothing as terrifying as this has ever happened to their home before. The chief, completely frozen in panic, loudly accuses Amami of being the one who called this terrible disaster down upon their heads. Amami is forced to use his arms to shield his eyes as dangerous broken wood and dusty debris fly wildly through the air all around them. The giant chimera stands right in front of them, but it does not make a move to attack. Trembling with fear, Corona wonders out loud why the monster is not striking them down. Amami suddenly shouts a quick warning to the small slime, but then he notices that the creature is pointing directly toward the side of the chimera's body. He suddenly understands the true reason for the monster's violent rampage, and realizes that some kind of foreign object is deeply stuck inside its flesh. Raising his voice so everyone can hear him over the noise, Amami calls out to the panicked beast folk to offer them a deal. He explains that he could easily run away and escape using the current chaos, but instead, he chooses to offer to handle the dangerous monster for them. In exchange for his help, he demands that they allow both him and Corona to leave the village safely and without any trouble. One of the nearby beastmen scoffs at this idea, loudly questioning why anyone would ever listen to a regular human being, but the village chief quickly cuts him off and accepts Amami's proposal, stating that this is a fair price they can easily afford to pay to save their home. Turning his full attention back to the chimera's painful injury, Amami studies the situation closely and thinks to himself that he should be able to cut through its tough skin to help it. With that realization in mind, he builds up his courage and gets completely ready to take action. The chimera lets out a low, terrifying growl that shakes the room. The chief, highly shaken by the sound, loudly demands to know exactly what Amami intends to do to the creature. Amami explains in a very calm voice that he plans to cut into the animal to remove the object stuck deep inside its body. The chief gasps in pure horror upon hearing this, strongly protesting that absolutely no one should ever dare to touch the sacred forest god itself. Completely ignoring the chief's loud protests, Amami calls out to Corona and asks her if she can give him a hand with the procedure. She answers him without a single bit of hesitation, confirming that she will help. Amami explains that as a doctor, he simply cannot bring himself to walk away from his duty to provide medical care to a living thing in pain. He reflects deeply on the heavy responsibility that all physicians carry on their shoulders. He notes that while some medical codes in other countries actually allow doctors to choose which patients they want to treat, the strict law in his own homeland completely forbids turning away a request for medical treatment without a very good legal reason. For him personally, whenever any living creature comes looking for medical help, he never wants to turn them away. As he tears open a bag of saline solution, sterile salt water, he proudly declares that whether the patient is a common criminal, a holy god, or anything else entirely, he must treat them simply because he is a dedicated doctor. He pours strong alcohol directly over the open wound to clean it thoroughly, which causes the giant chimera to flinch violently and let out a deafening roar of pure agony. In response to the sudden movement, The little slime moves fast to restrain the giant beast, completely wrapping its body around the monster to stop it from thrashing around and breaking things. Amami quickly thanks the helpful slime and asks it to keep holding the chimera perfectly steady for just a little bit longer. Trying to cover his ears against the loud, painful roars, he continues with the medical procedure by giving the monster an injection of lidocaine. This specific local anesthetic works by temporarily blocking the nerve signals in that part of the body, which effectively dulls both the physical sensation of pain and the ability to move. Gradually, the slime is able to loosen its tight grip as another medicine, midazolam, begins to take full effect on the beast. This strong sedative, which doctors commonly use to calm down stressed patients during emergency medical treatments, finally lulls the giant chimera into a deep, peaceful sleep. Amami exhales a long breath in total relief. Feeling incredibly grateful that the medication worked so well, he gets his razor ready and carefully holds onto the thick fur surrounding the open wound. Recognizing the high risk of a serious infection, he mutters a quiet apology under his breath to the animal before he begins shaving the hairy area, knowing very well that he cannot accurately figure out the correct spot to make his cut without clearing the skin first. Once the thick fur is completely cleared away from the skin, he explains to Corona that the weapon stuck inside the beast appears to be a spear with sharp barbs on it, much like a fish hook, meaning it cannot simply be pulled straight out without causing terrible damage to the flesh. He notes that under ideal circumstances, an operation like this should always be performed inside a clean hospital operating room, but that is clearly impossible in their current situation. Amami carefully disinfects the bare skin using povidone iodine, and its sharp, chemical scent instantly fills the surrounding air. He then places a clean, sterile cloth cover all around the injury. Calling Corona over to his side once again, he asks her for her assistance, and she responds to his request immediately. He explains to her that there's a sharp metal blade inside his medical bag, and he instructs her to use a pair of forceps, medical tweezers, to attach the blade securely to a metal handle to create a working scalpel. He makes sure to warn her absolutely not to touch the dangerous blade with her bare fingers. She agrees to the task and very carefully grips the tiny metal blade using the medical tool. Amami warns her one more time that the object is extremely sharp and urges her to be incredibly cautious with her movements. Moving very slowly and carefully, she lines up the sharp blade with the metal handle and gently slides it right into its slot. A soft clicking sound echoes in the room, and she proudly announces to him that the tool is fully assembled. Amami thanks her warmly and takes the finished scalpel directly from her hands, telling her that he will handle the rest of the surgical procedure by himself. Corona begins to ask him what she ought to do next to help, but he gently interrupts her speech to explain that there is a completely different, important task he would like her to handle in the meantime. He reveals that after he finishes operating on the monster, he fully intends to properly examine and treat all the injuries of the village people. Because of this plan, he asks her to go ahead and wash the locals' wounds using clean water and then dress them up in fresh, clean clothing. He kindly adds that given the terrifying things that have just happened to her, he would completely understand if this request feels like far too much work or pressure for her to handle right now. Corona lowers her eyes toward the ground, thinking over his words very carefully. Then, with a strong look of determination shining brightly in her eyes, she makes her final decision and declares out loud that she will gladly go fetch the fresh water and clean clothes for the villagers. Amami thanks her from the bottom of his heart for her bravery. Turning his full attention back toward the deeply sleeping chimera, he braces himself and thinks to himself that it is finally time to start the operation. With that strong resolve in his mind, he moves forward to begin the careful removal of the dangerous foreign object from the creature's body. A memory from the past comes to mind. Corona had once asked her grandfather about the forest god, and the village chief had confirmed that the powerful creature was very real. He explained to her that their people were only able to live safely in the forest because of that being. With its sharp claws, large fangs, and terrifying curse, the forest god frightened away any outsiders who might threaten the safety of their village. When Corona asked what the curse actually meant, the chief warned her that anyone who dared to touch the forest god would be afflicted by a terrible sickness. For that exact reason, he strictly told her that she must never go anywhere near the creature. Back in the present moment, Amami works steadily on the sleeping chimera, fully aware that the spear cannot be removed by simply pulling it straight out. The weapon has sharp barbs on it, making it stuck fast inside the flesh just like a fish hook. He thinks to himself that if it truly were a tiny fish hook, he could turn it, push the sharp point all the way through the skin, cut it free, and pull it out safely. However, doing that with a large weapon like a spear is completely impossible. Just as he suspected from the beginning, his only real option is to cut the weapon out of the flesh. He places his sharp scalpel against the chimera's skin and carefully studies the swollen bumps on either side of the open wound. reasoning that these bumps must show exactly where the sharp barbs are located inside. He presses the metal blade down firmly and makes his very first cut. A wave of relief washes over him when the thick skin splits open much more easily than he had expected. He makes the cut deeper, moving carefully toward the swollen bump. Suddenly, the metal blade strikes something very hard. He carefully cuts the flesh around the object, and a shiny metallic reflection appears in the wound. His eyes grow wide with focus as he finds the first sharp barb. Silently, he prays that nothing else inside the body has been caught or damaged by the weapon. Then he turns his full attention to the other side of the wound to repeat the process. As time passes, one of the nearby beastmen murmurs that he cannot see exactly what the human is doing, but he hopes that things must be going well. The chief responds that he has absolutely no idea what is happening. The chief secretly believes that even if Amami succeeds in saving their sacred forest god, the village will still be forced to kill the doctor afterward. In the chief's mind, Amami is bound to be cursed by the creature anyway, making him a permanent danger to their community. Right at that moment, Corona returns to the room and calls out to her grandfather. She informs him that she intends to clean and treat everyone's injuries, including his own. By this time, Amami has successfully uncovered both of the sharp barbs inside the flesh. He knows he will have to use medical thread to stitch the entire wound up afterward, but right now, he is racing against the clock. He reaches down toward the floor and thinks about how useful a proper, elevated operating table would be in a situation like this. With his medical tools completely ready, he tightly grips the exposed end of the wooden spear. Building up his courage, he gives a firm pull. The giant chimera stirs slightly from the movement, but fortunately stays asleep. Amami freezes completely, silently begging the giant monster not to wake up and attack. He reasons that the beast might have been stabbed by the traders while it was sleeping as well, which would explain why it is staying calm under the medicine. He tells himself that this procedure simply has to work. Slowly and very carefully, he continues to pull the weapon out. At long last, the heavy spear begins to slide out of the body. A large amount of dark blood pours out of the opening as the weapon is fully removed. Nearby, the chief angrily tells Corona that he completely refuses to let her touch or treat him. He snaps at her to stop acting like she is a magical healer, reminding her harshly that she is nothing more than a common slave and a regular member of the beast folk. Corona answers him in a very quiet but firm voice, explaining that even though she was forced to become a slave, she does not want to live like one. She tells him that she deeply understands what it means to suffer from terrible pain, and that is the exact reason why she wants to help the people. She begs him to let her clean his injuries. Upon hearing her words, the chief and the other men fall completely silent. One of the beast men finally speaks up, noting that this was the human doctor's direct instruction after all. Another man remarks that using clean water and clothes is certainly much better than simply licking their wounds to clean them. Someone else admits to the group that the cut on his arm has not stopped bleeding at all. All eyes turn back toward the chief, and at long last, he finally gives his permission for her to help. Just as the very last section of the long spear comes completely free of the body, Amami lets out a deep breath of relief, thinking to himself that the weapon is finally out. However, that feeling of relief lasts for only a single second. A massive amount of blood suddenly shoots out from the deep wound, spraying directly over his clothes and face. He immediately worries that the sharp spear might have accidentally cut a major blood vessel or artery inside the body. Dropping the bloody spear onto the floor, he quickly reaches into his bag for fresh medical gauze. One of the beast men shouts a loud warning at the sheer amount of blood filling the room, while another panics and asks if the situation is deadly. Corona and the village chief watch the scene in absolute horror. Amami quickly pushes the gauze deep into the open wound, using his hands to apply heavy pressure directly against the spot where the bleeding is coming from. Gradually, the heavy flow of blood slows down and then stops completely. He lets out another long sigh of relief. Corona calls out loudly to Yudo, anxiously asking him if everything is going to be all right. The village chief angrily tells his granddaughter to stay completely out of the situation, warning her to think carefully about how terrible of a curse will surely fall upon Amami after being completely drenched in the forest god's sacred blood. Meanwhile, Amami is already mentally planning out his very next medical step. He knows that he must urgently clamp the bleeding blood vessel with his tools and tie it off securely. But first he needs to reach over and grab the correct instruments. He softly lets Corona know that everything is going to be fine and expresses his gratitude for her deep worry and concern. Suddenly, the doctor freezes in place as he notices that the natural light is fading away very quickly. Heavy storm clouds are rolling across the sky, and he realizes that he will soon be left in total darkness where he will not be able to see his work at all. If he fails to stop the heavy bleeding correctly right now, the dangerous flow of blood will simply start all over again. Dark blood begins to leak out from the deep injury once more. Offering a quick apology for the difficult situation, Amami asks Corona if she would be willing to assist him one more time. Corona hesitates for a moment, her mind racing as she remembers her grandfather's strict warning never to go anywhere near the forest god. However, she then recalls Amami's inspiring words about how medicine is a skill that absolutely anyone can master if they are willing to learn, and how he promised they would do it together. A strong, determined look fills her eyes. She whispers a quiet apology to her grandfather, fully aware that she is about to completely disobey his orders, and bravely steps forward to help. She raises her voice to let the doctor know she is ready. Yudo Amami thanks Corona for bringing a bright torch to light up the darkness, and informs her that he would like her assistance with another specific task. He gently reassures her that she does not need to feel nervous at all. Corona stays completely still for a brief second, then gathers her courage and agrees to help. Amami asks her to hand him the special hemostatic forceps, bleeding control clamps, that he had set down on the ground earlier. He explains to her that they look very similar to the metal tool she used before to assemble the scalpel, featuring a thin and curved tip. Corona searches through the medical tools, picks up a curved pair of clamps, and shows them to him to check if they are the correct ones. Amami confirms that she has chosen the right tool and praises her warmly for identifying them perfectly, especially since his verbal explanation had been rather vague. While he continues working diligently on the injury, Amami reflects on the history and design of the forceps themselves. These specific surgical instruments are carefully created to grip, hold, and move bodily tissue, and they come in many different shapes and sizes depending entirely on what a doctor needs them to do. There are straight styles, curved designs, varieties with tiny grooves on the inside, and versions with sharp hooks. The specific pair he is using right now are designed to control severe bleeding during a surgical operation, and they are named after a famous French physician from the late 19th century named Jules-Émile Pien. Next, Amami instructs Corona to pick up the small, stick-like device resting at the bottom right of his equipment pile. She picks it up and flips the switch, instantly recognizing it as the small medical pen light she had seen him use back in the forest. Amami confirms her guess and asks her to shine that bright, focused light directly into the open wound, letting her know that she can now set the heavy torch down on the ground. Corona follows his instructions perfectly. Amami continues to keep firm, steady pressure on the injury, knowing very well that the dangerous spraying from the artery will start right back up the exact moment he removes the gauze if he is not incredibly careful. After waiting a little longer, he judges that the heavy flow has finally stopped. Corona watches the scene in absolute amazement as he informs her that the emergency situation is safely under control for the time being, allowing him to return to fixing up the rest of the torn flesh. Suddenly, Corona cries out in shock, pointing out to him that his clothes and skin are completely covered from head to toe in thick blood. She asks him with great concern if it is truly safe or acceptable for him to keep working in such a messy state. Amami admits to her that being covered in blood is certainly far from perfect when it comes to clean medical hygiene, but they have absolutely no other choice in this situation. He explains that a medical professional can never simply stop a serious operation halfway through completion. He strongly insists that a true doctor never runs away or abandons a patient who is in desperate need. With that powerful determination fixed in his mind, he pushes forward with his work. Corona watches his every move very closely as Amami prepares his medical suture thread, stitches, and begins sewing the flesh together to permanently stop the internal bleeding. In his thoughts, he reviews the basic rules of medical stitching. Suture threads are carefully rated by their physical thickness, ranging from very thick numbers down to incredibly fine, thin strings. Doctors use absorbable threads inside the body because they will naturally dissolve over time without needing to be pulled out later, while they choose strong, non-absorbable threads when a wound requires long-term physical support to heal. He pulls the stitch tight, reasoning to himself that this should completely hold back the blood as long as the knot stays secure. Working with great speed and skill, he ties off the broken blood vessels tightly, completing a proper medical ligation. At long last, Amami announces to Corona that they no longer need to use the clamping forceps, and he allows himself to take a quick, quiet breath of relief because the most immediate, life-threatening danger has finally passed. Even so, he knows very well that closing up a wound that was filled with dirty, contaminated outdoor tissue carries a very high risk of dangerous complications. To prevent this, he decides to place a soft Penrose drain inside the wound as he finishes sewing it shut. Apologizing to her once again for the long and difficult night, he asks Corona if she would be willing to keep helping him for just a little bit longer. She readily agrees to stay by his side, while the rest of the village beast folk stand all around them, watching everything unfold in a completely tense and heavy silence. This simple, flexible rubber tube is designed to allow trapped bodily fluids to leak out safely instead of building up inside, which greatly reduces the risk of a nasty infection. As his hands move skillfully, Amami notes out loud that he would truly love to monitor how the giant chimera recovers over the next few weeks, though he sadly realizes that will be nearly impossible since he is not allowed to stay inside their village. He thinks briefly about the history of the Penrose drain itself, remembering that this simple but effective tube was named after a famous American gynecologist from the past named Charles Bingham Penrose. Before he even realizes how much time has slipped away, the dark night ends and a morning dawn breaks across the sky. Corona speaks up with deep admiration, praising Yuto for his absolutely incredible work and noting that he must be completely worn out and exhausted after working through the entire storm. Amami thanks her kindly and tells her that she did a wonderful job as an assistant, adding that the brave forest god itself deserves plenty of praise for fighting through the pain. Right at that exact moment, as if following a perfect cue, the giant chimera slowly opens its large eyes. Seeing that the creature is alive and stable, Amami finally allows his exhausted body to completely collapse onto the ground. He declares to the remaining villagers that the operation is completely finished, and the removal of the dangerous foreign object is officially over. In the morning beside a river, Corona offers to wash Amami's clothes and suggests that he take some rest. Amami declines her offer, explaining that it is fine and that he needs to wash the blood off his own body anyway. He adds that the idea of getting infected by a dangerous virus is quite scary to him. Corona tilts her head in deep confusion and wonders what exactly a virus is. Amami pauses for a moment, then steps closer to her and apologizes while asking her to wait for just a brief second. He carefully examines her eyes and explains that it would be best for both of them to wash their eyes along with the rest of their bodies. Corona mentions that she regularly washes her face in the river, but she notes that it always hurts whenever the water gets directly into her eyes. Amami clarifies that because they are currently using river water, they will absolutely need to wash themselves thoroughly with completely clean water later on. However, he explains that for the time being, it is vital to rinse the blood out of their eyes right away. He warns her that the process will sting a little bit and asks her to be brave, to which she completely agrees. While he helps her rinse her eyes, Amami thinks about how blood splashing into a person's eyes can pass on dangerous pathogens, germs that cause disease, when medical workers handle severe bleeding, such as during a surgical operation. Under ideal conditions, people should always wear protective goggles in those situations. Once they finish, Amami praises Corona for handling the stinging so well and mentions that he would much rather have a proper, warm bath instead of washing themselves inside an outdoor river. Corona explains to him that only wealthy human aristocrats, nobles, have access to baths like that. Amami repeats the word aristocrats very thoughtfully to himself. Corona then points out that he still has blood on his body and insists that they must wash all the viruses away immediately. Before he can offer any response, Amami suddenly loses consciousness and collapses straight into the water with a loud splash, causing Corona to cry out in sudden alarm and call his name out loud. Later on, back inside the beast folk village, Amami sits comfortably in the chief's house while wearing clothes that the older man gave him. The chief asks him if he genuinely intends to take Corona with him and leave the village on a long journey. Amami confirms his plans, explaining that he fully understands the dangerous situation now. He notes that there is a strong chance the exact same human slave traders who attacked before will come back to capture her again. The chief looks down sadly and explains that Corona's mother passed away shortly after giving birth to her, and her father died from severe injuries that he received while out hunting for food. The older man notes that such terrible tragedies are sadly very common among their people. Amami asks in a quiet voice if both giving birth to a child and the daily task of gathering food can easily cost them their lives. In his own mind, he remembers how incredibly high maternal mortality, the rate of mothers dying from childbirth, used to be in his own home country before major improvements in medical care reduced those numbers drastically. The chief answers that things would certainly be different if a magical healing mage ever visited their village, but he admits that such a miracle is highly unlikely to happen. Amami's thoughts then drift to other developing parts of the world where the rate of mothers dying during childbirth still remains devastatingly high due to a lack of proper health care. The chief goes on to say that there has only ever been a small handful of young people living in their village, and now even their sacred forest god has been badly injured. To put it simply, he feels there is absolutely nothing left for them here. He believes that sooner or later, the entire village will be completely captured and taken over by cruel humans. He reflects that if Corona manages to leave the area before that terrible event happens, then perhaps her departure is simply meant to be. Right at that exact moment, Corona wakes up from her sleep, which catches the chief completely by surprise. He states in a very bitter tone that he has already done everything he possibly could to protect the village, and he confesses that the harsh reality of their situation weighs incredibly heavily on his mind. Amami immediately thinks about the kind village mayor from his remote island back home in Japan, and he assures the chief that absolutely no one deserves to be abandoned and left behind. He insists that there must still be a good way forward for them, and he tells the older man that he does not have to carry the heavy weight of everything completely alone. Corona then speaks up, telling her grandfather firmly that she will definitely return to the village one day. The chief looks at her in total shock as she explains her strong determination to repay Amami for saving the lives of the villagers, the sacred forest god, and herself. She states that she will travel alongside the doctor and assist him with his medical work. She plans to learn exactly how to heal people whenever they are injured or sick, and she promises that once she gains those skills, she will return home to help her people. Hearing this, the chief's eyes fill up with deep emotion. Amami then asks the chief where he can find the necessary medical tools to treat people properly, explaining that he fully intends to bring those items back to help the village. The chief responds that such advanced tools can only be found far away in the human lands. Amami shakes his head slowly at this answer, confessing that he has a very strong feeling he would not fit in well at all among the human beings of this strange new world. More importantly, the doctor wants to stay in places where Corona will be completely safe. He asks the villagers if there's a specific location where many different races of people live peacefully together. Far away at the World Tree Cave in the Elven territory, thick green plants twist through the streets and climb over the buildings. Several elves stand gathered before two important figures. A priest announces to the crowd that their land will send out two magic users, a bearded man and a black-haired woman, who will dedicate themselves to treating others. Princess Yuno states that while other races are able to cast various types of magic, only human beings are capable of using true healing magic, and she strongly urges the chosen mages to do everything they possibly can to help. The priest agrees with her, saying that they also recognize the incredible power of deep faith. Beside Princess Yuno stands Queen Molina, who is quietly thinking to herself about the situation. She reflects bitterly on the idea of faith, considering how humans always demand heavy payments and high taxes from other races in exchange for their healing magic. She wonders if this power is really just a political tool for control. Still, she knows there are countless injuries and sicknesses in the world that only magic can currently cure, and she wonders how the world might change if other races could somehow learn to wield healing powers on their own. Back with the beast folk, the villagers gather around as Amami and Corona get ready to leave on their journey. One of the beast men speaks up, admitting that even though Amami is a human and someone they would normally consider a magical healer, he is still an absolutely wonderful person. The man truly apologizes for all the trouble and misunderstanding they caused the doctor. Amami answers that everything is in the past now, and he asks only that they remember to follow the medical advice he gave them earlier. Another beast man answers him firmly, repeating the exact instructions to keep their physical cuts clean, wash their hands thoroughly, and gargle water regularly to stay healthy. Amami smiles warmly at hearing this. The village chief then informs Amami that if he follows the path straight ahead, it will lead him west toward a demon realm. He explains that there should be no humans living in that territory, and instead, many diverse races live there together. Amami thanks the chief sincerely for this useful information. Turning his attention to Corona, the chief instructs his granddaughter that once they walk outside the boundaries of the village, she must make sure to call Yudo her master. He explains that since she is a member of the beast folk traveling alongside a human man, how they look to outsiders matters greatly for her own personal safety. Corona smiles very brightly and agrees to the rule. Amami, however, hesitates and quietly mutters to himself that the title of master sound a bit too extreme. They wave their final goodbyes to the crowd. As the villagers wave back at them, the chief's eyes fill completely with tears. He remembers another sad farewell from a long time ago when Corona's own father left the village and never came back home. Overcome by these heavy emotions, the chief covers his eyes with his hands. As they walk away from the village, Amami admits that he feels quite worried. Corona asks him exactly what is troubling his mind. He explains to her that when he went to check on the forest god's injury the day before, the giant chimera had already run away into the woods. He notes that he knew from the very beginning that he would not be able to watch over the healing process for a long time. He worries that if an empty pocket, known as a dead space, forms underneath the stitched skin and gets infected, the results could be highly dangerous. In his medical thoughts, he reviews how these hidden spaces under the flesh can easily fill up with trapped bodily fluid or pus, which stops a wound from healing correctly. Suddenly, Corona jumps up in surprise as the giant chimera steps out from behind the trees. Amami calls out to the creature with a huge sense of relief. The monster lies down flat on the ground, and Amami rushes right over to it, wondering out loud if the animal had been waiting for them to arrive. He carefully inspects the surgical wound and is completely astonished to see that the skin is already closing up tightly, with its thick fur growing back beautifully over the spot. He thinks to himself about what a fascinating medical case this would be to study under proper conditions, though he realizes such thoughts are useless in this situation. Gently stroking the chimera's back, he says he is sorry that he cannot stick around to watch the injury heal any further, and he softly asks the creature to be very careful and avoid getting hurt in the future. As Amami and Corona start walking down the path again, the giant chimera begins to follow right behind them. Amami stops walking and asks the monster if it truly wants to join them on their journey. The chimera's face brightens up immediately, and it happily rubs its large body against him. Amami wonders out loud if taking the creature along is really a good idea, considering that the local people had worshipped it as a holy forest god. Corona feels a bit uneasy about the situation and says she has no answer for him. After thinking about it for a brief moment, Amami decides that it will be perfectly fine to bring the monster along. He reasons that it would be terrible if the chimera were attacked by cruel humans ever again, so they might as well stay together to protect one another for a while. The little slime, feeling quite jealous of all the attention the monster is receiving, begins to tug playfully on Amami's hair. Laughing out loud at the little creature, Amami says he is sorry and makes sure to give the slime some affectionate attention too. Corona, suddenly feeling a bit left out of the group love as well, steps forward and wraps her arms tightly around him in a big, tight hug. Amami reacts with surprise to Corona's sudden embrace, but then gently pats her head to comfort her as well. With every member of the group now feeling completely happy and satisfied, he declares that they will all travel together from this moment on. He reflects on the fact that he still knows very little about this strange new world, but he feels a sense of comfort knowing that he will at least not have to face it alone. Meanwhile, far away at the World Tree Cave, Krennelson questions the priestess, Cress, about the details of their recent discussion. Cress explains to him that the conversation was actually much more of a strict warning than a regular chat. She notes that there are wise beings who live deep inside the tree caves whose incredibly long lives have given them a massive amount of wisdom. She explains that if she senses even a tiny hint that any of these beings are attempting to steal human healing magic, she must step in to stop them immediately. She continues by explaining that healing magic was originally given to humans and to humans alone. This unique power is the exact reason why humans have enjoyed wealth, safety for their borders, and deep respect from all the other races. Because of this magic, people inside the human kingdom are able to live their lives in total peace and happiness. Krennelson then asks her what exactly would happen if that powerful magic ever managed to spread into other foreign lands. The priestess answers him very directly, stating that if the magic ever left their borders, the human territories would likely be completely wiped off the map in an instant. She explains that it is a brutal law of this world that the weak are always overwhelmed and mistreated by the strong. In the distant past, before they had any power, human beings were constantly hunted by demi-humans, lived in absolute terror of powerful demons, and had to run for their lives from giant dragons. Feeling deep pity for their helpless situation, God decided to share a tiny piece of his miraculous healing magic with them. Later on, when a terrible, deadly sickness spread across the land and ruined all living creatures, humans were able to use their healing magic to survive the disaster. They multiplied so successfully that they eventually became the largest and most populated race in the entire world. Over time, however, some humans began to falsely believe that owning this unique healing magic made them the rightful representatives of God and the ultimate rulers of the planet. God felt a deep sadness over this arrogant outcome, as he had never given them healing magic just to help them conquer other groups. Yet, he also did not want to repeat the mistakes of the past by handing out magical miracles carelessly to everyone, even though there were countless fragile lives that would be lost without help. Instead, he decided to choose a completely different kind of gift for the world. He granted the ultimate power of knowledge, which is something that absolutely any living creature can acquire through careful thinking and logic without ever breaking the natural laws of the universe. That special power took the physical form of a general doctor named Tadato Amami, and this is the grand story of how he brings light to a dark world through the true power of medicine. Deep within the Elven lands, a female elf named Sia paused with great uncertainty, questioning whether her companion Krennelson was truly ready to follow through with their dangerous choice. With a dark and serious expression, Krennelson explained that she had witnessed the situation herself, noting that neither powerful magic nor medical herbs had any effect on the patient anymore. He made it clear that the sickness had progressed far past any hope of a recovery. Sia became entirely quiet, fully understanding the heavy meaning behind his words. She knew their secret escape could easily trigger a massive war between nations. And even if they hurried back to their homeland right away, they would still receive all the blame for causing the conflict. In the worst possible outcome, they would be held completely responsible for every terrible thing that happened afterward. Colonel Sin bit his teeth together in frustration, explaining that if they were completely honest and admitted to the rulers that there was no cure, they would likely be put to death on the very spot. He stated that he seriously doubted Sia wanted to suffer that same terrible fate. Because of this danger, he strongly urged her to stop wasting time and delay no longer, insisting that they had to run away immediately. Meanwhile, at the majestic world tree, Queen Molina sat quietly upon her royal throne. Suddenly, Princess Yuno rushed into the room, her loud voice causing an instant alarm. Realizing her lack of royal manners, she quickly corrected the way she spoke to the queen and urgently reported that the human healing mages had completely run away. Queen Molina stopped what she was doing, and the royal guards standing all around turned their heads, waiting for her next official order. After letting out a short, tired sigh, Princess Yuno added that news of this escape would undoubtedly spread across the land very quickly. Queen Molina acknowledged this serious threat and decided that she must personally report the bad news to their powerful neighbors. Soon after, she stood directly before two members of the dragon folk, bowing her body deeply to show her sincere apologies and explaining that she felt it was best to tell them the truth directly. One of the dragons, who had dark black hair, replied that it was highly fortunate she chose to inform them herself, because otherwise they would have been caught completely by surprise. From the dragon's cold tone of voice, Queen Molina realized that they had actually already discovered the truth on their own. She was allowed to enter their private space, and once inside the dragon folk's main office, their high leader very directly asked how Queen Molina and Princess Yuno planned to take full responsibility for this massive disaster. Deep inside the thick forest, Amami carefully checked on the stitches he had placed in the chimera's body. The large injury had completely closed up and healed, although the patches of shaved fur would still take a significant amount of time to grow back normally. The giant monster reacted with great love, happily licking Amami's face to show its gratitude. In contrast, Corona looked down at her own physical injury with worry, noting that her body showed absolutely none of that incredibly fast recovery. Amami gently comforted her by explaining that her slower healing process was perfectly normal. He told her that the chimera possessed an amazing regenerative ability, the power to regrow and repair damaged body parts, that was far superior to almost any other living creature. He thought to himself that a unique medical situation like this would be highly valuable to write down in a case report, a detailed medical document that doctors use to share new knowledge about rare sicknesses and treatments with the rest of the world. Before they could fully relax, a wild snake suddenly leaped out from the dark shadows, straight toward Corona. Both she and Amami shouted out in sudden fear as the snake snapped its jaws directly at her neck collar, snapping the band completely apart. Though he was deeply shaken by the scare, Amami quickly realized that the snake had intentionally only removed the heavy collar from her neck. He reasoned that the creature might have done this as a silent way to apologize for accidentally hurting her leg in the woods previously. Corona smiled warmly, wrapped her arms around the friendly snake in a hug, and expressed her sincere thanks to the holy forest god. At that same moment, the little slime began pulling urgently on Amami's cheeks, desperately trying to point his attention toward a very scary and threatening noise echoing nearby. Not too far away from their position, Princess Yuno was running for her life through the thick trees while a large pack of fierce black wolves chased closely behind her. She tried her best to cast a magical spell to protect herself, but she stumbled and lost her focus when one of the aggressive wolves suddenly jumped up and bit her hard on the head. Finding herself completely surrounded by the hungry beasts, she took a shaky step backward, thinking bitterly about how incredibly unlucky she was to run into such dangerous monsters at a time like this. She knew she absolutely had to find and bring back the escaped human healing mages no matter what difficulty she faced. Just as the wolves were about to spring forward to attack her, the giant chimera suddenly crashed directly into the open clearing with Amami riding securely on its back, completely scattering the wolf pack with a series of incredibly powerful stomps. The remaining wolves turned and ran away in absolute terror. Amami climbed down from the creature's back and walked over to Princess Yuno, noting out loud how incredibly close she had come to losing her life. He could see immediately that she was badly hurt and bleeding. The princess's eyesight began to go dark and blurry as she tried to make sense of the strange sight right in front of her eyes, which included a holy forest god, a member of the beast folk, and a normal human man working together. Before she could process anything else, she completely lost consciousness and collapsed. Amami caught her falling body right away and shouted for the others to help him. Corona quickly asked what their next move should be, and Amami responded without a single moment of hesitation that they were going to medically treat her injuries, instructing Corona that they needed to start by gently laying her flat on the ground. The little slime quickly changed its shape to form a soft cushion, and Amami carefully laid the unconscious Princess Yuno down on top of it. He turned his attention to her most severe head injury first, washing it out with saline, sterile salt water used for cleaning wounds, while quietly hoping his limited supply would hold out. He pressed a piece of clean gauze firmly against the cut, but the dark blood kept leaking through the cloth. Realizing he needed a different approach, he asked Corona to fetch a special liquid medicine from his bag. Once she brought it back, Amami explained to her that this mixture contained lidocaine with epinephrine, a combination where the first medicine completely numbs the pain and the second medicine squeezes the local blood vessels tightly to stop the bleeding. Using a syringe, Amami carefully injected this numbing fluid directly into the open wound, working step by step while Corona watched him with deep respect and amazement. He held a fresh piece of gauze against the flesh once more, feeling a great sense of relief when the dangerous flow of blood finally came to a halt. Next, he prepared a mechanical skin stapler to close the opening. In his thoughts, he went over why this modern tool is often much better than using traditional needle and thread stitches. It causes less pulling stress on the skin, allows better blood flow to help the flesh heal, keeps the wound edges tightly stable, and closes the cut much faster, as long as there are no important organs or deep blood vessels hidden right underneath the surface. Moving with smooth, experienced motions, he quickly stapled the wound shut. Corona was completely amazed at how effortlessly the open skin was sealed together. Amami pointed out to her that the injury was thankfully quite shallow and free of dirt, which made his job a lot easier. For the moment, her emergency medical care was finished. However, as he began putting his medical instruments back into his pack, a deeply worrying thought came to his mind. His modern medical supplies were running dangerously low, and he still had absolutely no idea how he would ever replace or refill them in this strange world. Just then, Princess Yuno slowly woke up and pushed her body up into a sitting position, but she froze instantly when she caught sight of the little slime resting nearby. She let out a loud scream of terror upon spotting the massive chimera, and she screamed out yet again the moment her eyes landed on the unfamiliar figures of Amami and Corona. Corona excitedly called out that the princess was finally awake. Seeing the injured woman wince as a sharp pain throbbed through her head, Corona quickly and urgently warned her not to touch her fresh head injury with her dirty, bare hands, looking over at her master to back her up. Amami nodded in agreement and softly advised Princess Yuno to remain calm and rest. He explained to her that he had already taken care of all her painful wounds, though it would still take time for them to heal completely. Princess Yuno carefully felt her own body and realized with surprise that the heavy bleeding had entirely stopped. Amami informed her that he had safely closed the cut on her head, adding that while it would probably leave a small scar, she could easily hide it underneath her hair, though he politely apologized for the mark anyway. In complete shock, the royal elf wondered to herself if this ordinary human man had really been the one to fix her severe injuries. The flow of blood had been so incredibly heavy that she assumed a miracle like magic was the only thing in the world capable of stopping it. She asked Amami directly if he was actually a magical healing mage. While the princess stared at him waiting for an answer, Amami hesitated to respond, but Corona quickly jumped into the conversation. She strongly insisted that the doctor was completely different from any other human, proudly proclaiming to the princess that her master was undoubtedly the greatest healer in the history of the human race. Amami thought to himself that such a massive exaggeration could never actually be proven without proper scientific tests. But he quietly decided, as he always did, to simply focus on doing his absolute best to help anyone who was suffering. Deeply touched by their kindness, Princess Yuno whispered softly that perhaps her people should have trusted the wise guidance of their sacred forest god all along instead of putting all their blind faith into the human church. Hearing its title mentioned, the giant chimera simply tilted its massive head in utter confusion. All of a sudden, Princess Yuno brought her hands together tightly and desperately begged Amami to save the lives of her dying people. Caught completely off guard by her intense emotional plea, Amami automatically nodded and agreed to help before he could even think about it. She quickly offered an apology for making such a sudden request, starting to explain that her entire kingdom was in a state of terrible danger. But she cut her own words short in absolute disbelief when she suddenly realized that the doctor had already agreed to her plea. Amami simply requested that she point him in the right direction and tell him exactly where they needed to travel. Emotional tears welled up in Princess Yuno's eyes, and as she wiped them away, she begged him to travel straight to her home territory to find a cure for a terrifying illness that was causing people to violently throw up blood. Amami requested more details about the symptoms, and Princess Yuno explained that the mysterious sickness always started with agonizing pains deep in the stomach, which quickly led to violent fits of vomiting up bright red blood. She noted that a huge number of her people had already passed away from the disease, making it a truly horrific curse. She further added that the poor patients would pass completely pitch-black waste from their bowels and grow weaker and more frail with each passing day. Listening to these descriptions, Amami immediately recognized the classic medical signs of gastrointestinal bleeding, internal bleeding somewhere inside the digestive system. Noting to himself that the dark, black waste strongly suggested the bleeding source was located high up in the upper digestive tract, the stomach or the upper intestine. He mentally reviewed the physical layout of the digestive system and quietly hoped that the modern medicines he carried in his bag would be enough to treat such a serious internal condition. Even so, he knew very well that he could not make an accurate diagnosis until he could examine the sick patients with his own eyes. Without wasting another second, Amami announced that the group should set out immediately. He turned to the giant chimera and asked if it would be willing to carry them on its back once more, and the helpful monster responded with a happy, low growl. The travelers all climbed securely onto its broad back as the beast sprinted forward to build up speed, opened its massive wings, and soared high up into the sky toward the distant world tree cave. As they glided through the air, Amami and his companions looked down in awe at the massive, sweeping landscape passing far below them. Meanwhile, back inside the dragon folk's main office, one of the dragon men questioned whether Queen Molina was truly certain that her young daughter would succeed in finding and bringing the human doctors back to their land. Another dragon man answered coldly that absolute desperation would guarantee her success, noting grimly that if Princess Yuno failed her mission, her mother and every single living soul in their entire kingdom would face complete and total destruction. Hearing those harsh words, Queen Molina's heart filled with deep, heavy worry as her thoughts turned entirely toward the safety of her daughter.